Hey everyone, this month's episode of SG Squared, Steve Gladen on small groups, is going to be a little bit different. In the world of small groups, a giant recently passed away. Chris Surratt, who has written several books, taught hundreds of conferences and seminars, and mentored countless individuals, including myself, was suddenly taken home to be with the Lord. In honor of Chris and his incredible impact in the small group world, we reached out to Brian Daniel, Chris's co-host on the Group Answers podcast, and asked if we could share an episode featuring Chris and Steve. Brian graciously agreed, and that's what we are presenting to you today. As you're listening, please don't forget to say a prayer for Chris's wife and family, and thank God for the impact that God had on churches around the world through Chris. Let's listen in.
Hey, this is Brian with the Group Answer Show. So how are your Bible study groups doing after the disruptions of the past few years? Recent data from Lifeway Research provides valuable insights into the state of groups, leading to practical steps for fostering vibrant and healthy groups. The State of Groups Insights report provides an inside look at how churches across the nation are conducting their group ministries, the key ministry for making disciples in the local church. Packed with insights for your group ministry, the report equips pastors and group ministry leaders to multiply kingdom impact by equipping group leaders to make disciples through groups ministry. Visit lifewayresearch.com/stateofgroups to read the full report, explore the data, and learn how to establish a healthy and thriving groups ministry.
Lifeway Leadership Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Group Answers Podcast, a weekly show designed to resource, train, and encourage small group leaders. Each episode considers current trends and resources, as well as timeless truths and methods of discipleship. It's hosted by Brian Daniel and Chris Surratt. Now, enjoy the show. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Group Answers. My name is Chris Surratt, and I am your host for this episode. My co-host, Brian Daniel, could not be here, which I told him was actually probably a better thing if he's not on the cat, because he holds it back, really. I mean, you guys know that. You listen every week. No, I'm just kidding. I love Brian. But he couldn't be here, but I am joined by my good friend, Steve Gladen. Hey, Steve.
Hey, it's great to be with my favorite host of Group Answers.
Good answer. Speaking of Group Answers, that was a great answer. Steve is a true friend of the podcast. I don't even know how many times you've been on this podcast, Steve. But if you haven't heard him before, he is a pastor of small groups at Saddleback Church in California and other places. He has been there for longer than I've been alive, I think. Right?
Wow, that hurts. 24 years, but I think you're just a smidge over 24.
Yeah, no, double that. And that's about where I am. But no, he's been there a long time, which is amazing because that is definitely not normal in especially the ministry world or really the small groups world, which is kind of sad, but quite a legacy that he's leaving as he dies. No, that sounded terrible. It sounded like I'm setting you up for
wow. I was going to say, well, who's he talking
about? Terminal
That's
disease. No, he's leaving a legacy and continues to do that at Saddleback. And I'm so excited to have Steve on. Steve and I have known each other for many, many years. And I think we've told the story on Group Answers before, but I met him at a conference that they were putting on at Saddleback, and somebody introduced me to him. And I was like, hey, Steve, it's great to know you. I'm reading your book. And he goes, okay, well, here's my cell phone. And I said, that's great. I figured it was probably the cell phone of his assistant's assistant. And so I called him one morning at 2 a.m. and he answered. So it is Steve.
Yeah, at 2 a.m. I will answer. 6 a.m, it's voicemail.
That's true. That is true. No, but that's just the kind of guy he is. We host co-host, co-teach a conference together called Align that we just did one in.
And Accelerate. We did
and
Accelerate.
That's
too.
true. That's true.
If you're a point person, you'll see one of the two of us.
That is true. But we just did an Align in Irvine, California. I got to host it at my church, Harvest Christian Fellowship. So that was a lot of fun last week. And then as of this recording, we're doing another one in Atlanta, Georgia, which will be fun. And then I think we're doing one at the end of the year in Nashville, but you can check all that out on the website, correct?
Yeah, it's a great conference that we both love to do because we put our heads together and we got, close to 60 plus years of groups ministry, putting together a conference that if you're new to the game or you don't have your footing under you, we give you some great essentials. So save yourself a lot of pain points and spend a day with us and don't make the mistakes we made. So learn from us.
We always say it's the essentials, and it is. It really is getting the essentials of small groups, but there is so much more gold in there. We're having some really large churches that are coming to these that are, getting a lot out of it, and it's a great first step before Accelerate. So if you're looking at how kind of a development pathway for your ministry, Align is a great place to start, and then Accelerate is kind of your next step where you can bring your team and make plans together. And so it's a great pathway. But I'm especially glad to have Steve on today because as we were discussing before we went on the air, I am a St. Louis Cardinals fan, have been my entire life, grew up in the great city of St. Louis. And Steve lives in California, and I believe you're an Angels fan. Is that correct?
That's because God has angels, so that's why we like this team.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad it's the Angels, not the Dodgers. I would have serious issues with that because the Angels never win anything, so who cares? But
True that.
One of the best Cardinals players ever, Albert Pujols. The Angels stole him away several years ago. I guess it's been about a decade ago, and so he left
$354 million
for $354 million in greener pastures. And how many World Series did you guys win during that time?
Yeah, we don't count on such minuscule things like trophies and that, but it's more about life together.
Yeah. Well, the Cardinals won the same amount, although they went to a couple of World Series during that time, but did not manage to win. But anyways, it was just announced that Pujols is coming back for one more year with the Cardinals at the price tag of $2.5 million. So thank you, Anaheim Angels, for the gift.
If you ever wondered if California didn't know how to do business and run their state, we just put an exclamation point on that little exchange right there.
Yeah. Although, if you figure in the cost of living, the $2.5 million is probably equivalent to the $354 million that he was getting in California. So, it's probably a wash, actually.
That's probably true.
Yeah. But one reason I start with this story is we're going to talk about data. Or stats, as I like to say, because I'm a baseball freak. But data is important. It's something that we need to think about as groups, people. We don't always have the best data at our fingertips, I think, as groups, people, because, small groups, discipleship is not always as quantifiable, I think, as other ministries. I mean, if you are a youth pastor, you probably have either a midweek service or a Sunday afternoon service or whatever, where you have kids and you count them. Hopefully you say we had this many kids come to youth service. And so that's a stat. If you're a kids pastor, same thing. You've got this many kids coming to our Sunday morning programming or whatever it is, and you're counting them. Where if you do small groups, especially off-campus small groups in homes, coffee houses, planes, or in Steve's case, yachts, true story.
Yes.
You can't always count them, or it's not as easy to count them. So sometimes we just go, well, we hope they're showing up. We really do. We have this many groups. Do we know how many are attending? It's ish this many. So we don't always have the greatest data. So what I want to talk about with Steve, because I think they do about as good a job as any church that I know. And he talks about this in Align, by the way, but at capturing not only those hard stats, which are those numbers that we should know. And I want to ask Steve what those numbers are for them, but also what he calls soft stats. And we'll get into what that means in just a minute. But let's start with the hard stats. I think it's important that we know what they are. So for you guys specifically, Steve, what are those hard stats that you want to know? Maybe you look at weekly, maybe it's monthly, but to make sure that you've got a healthy ministry.
Yeah. And I'll do this. I'm going to back up just a second, just preface it, because you do talk about data. And a lot of times, obviously we know Jesus is king. We will say that over and over again. Everyone on this podcast, we give a big nod in their room that they're listening to towards that. But the thing in small group ministry, what we don't realize is that really data is king, because data is so important to help us understand, are we achieving what we're wanting to achieve? And Temple Courts kind of has their own set of data that are they hitting the marks? And in small group ministry, we have our own set of data. And as Chris alluded to, we predominantly, most churches, and I will say I have done in the 5 churches I've been a part of staff, their staff, we tend to focus on what we'd like to call hard data. And what I discovered is that we missed on soft data. And so, but to answer Chris's question, because I know we'll get to both, is what is that hard data? And that hard data is the data that you need to measure health in the individual and the health of your group, because we know it's not just about attendance. We have learned long ago that attendance doesn't give us spiritual health. This pandemic showed out in countless times. There were a lot of people who grew old in the church, but they did not grow up spiritually in the church. They may have perfect attendance, but boy, oh boy, were they cantankerous? Were they vocal? Were they mean? I got emails from some people that knew Jesus longer than closer than I've been a follower of Christ myself. And it was just like, wow.
As my brother likes to say, some sheep like to bite.
Oh, boy. Thank you. I'm going to steal that story because, man, not only did they bite, but then they had friends that bite too. So, but part of what we got to realize is that you've got to first understand, do you have measurements for individual health? So if you got a disciple, do you have measurements that can, and like Chris said, discipleship isn't too quantifiable, but what you can quantify is, are they engaging with it? And you can lead them towards that part. And so like two of the data points we love the most are, have you done a health assessment? Have you engaged with trying to figure out, where am I at with where we at Saddleback Church would say, this is where we'd want to drive you towards spiritual health. And that's balancing the 5 verbs of the Great Commission, Great Commandment. So we have just a simple 35 question assessment, just so you as a veteran Christian or a nominal Christian, or maybe not even a Christian, you could take an assessment just to say, hey, let me just kind of pinpoint where might be some growth areas I need to have. And then, and I'll tell you this, Chris, I'm sure you experience it too. People love to assess themselves. I mean, every time a new spiritual personality test comes out, people love to learn about themselves, but they don't like to apply it to working with others. And so I would say, unfortunately, we hold the true. We have a lot of people that love to engage in our health assessment, but when it comes to engaging the planner and putting accountability around you that you choose, I mean, this is the crack up, the stats start to drift off a little bit. But so one of them is, the health assessment, and that helps us with the individual. Then there's another assessment. We have a group assessment, a little bit lighter. It's only about 10 questions, basically 2 on each purpose, kind of working at 2 angles of the purpose on measurables and how are they engaging with it, or I should say, understanding it. And with that one, we used to just send it to the leaders and, hey, would you just give us a snapshot of your leaders? It literally takes less than a couple minutes to engage with it and complete it. And one particular time when we sent it out to all our leaders, all of our stats they were just off the charts worse. And what happened was we went back to our IT team and said, what in the world happened? First off, we were going, what happened in our last calendar year, our last 6 months that took us in such a dip? And what happened was they accidentally sent it to everybody in the group. And what we discovered was our leaders have what shall we say, they have a great gift of faith in how they view their group. And the leaders had a little bit more of a the attenders had a little bit more of a realistic view.
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah. Figure that, right?
Yeah.
So have you guys continued sending it to everybody since then?
Oh yeah. Since then, we'll just send it to everybody. So those are the two big ones that we would like to really press on all of our campuses and with all of our connections pastors on, how are we doing it in those areas? One's done yearly. The other one is done, the group one is done every 6 months. But then there's other things that are very hard stats data. We have a training pathway for our group leaders. How far along are they on that training pathway? With how they're doing. There's a curriculum pathway. How well are they engaging curriculum, and what type of curriculum are they engaging? The different tools other than the health assessment and the group assessment that we have, from IDEA. So there's different hard metrics there. And then there's obviously the, at your campus, how many people are helping you manage your small group ministry based on the number of groups you have? And do you have those ratios done? So that's a broad spectrum of hard data that is important to us. And obviously beyond that, then you start to get into the group life itself, who's on the roster in your group. We don't take attendance. We're more concerned about have they taken a health assessment or a group assessment is a stronger mark with us than attendance, because our assessments will guarantee us attendance is happening, whereas attendance doesn't always guarantee health is happening. But there's, what day does the group meet? Is the group opened? Is the group closed? Where's the leader at in their developmental process with our overall church and different things like that. So there's as many stats that you can think of that are hard stat. The thing I would say though, is before you start asking for data and stats from your group leaders, make sure it's the data that helps you get your groups healthier, and make sure anything you're asking for, you're using. Just don't collect stats to sit in some room that will never, ever be used or will never, ever give you a clue on what you're trying to do. So it's hard data, super, super important. But as I think we're going to be heading into pretty soon, is the soft data is what's more better. Yeah.
But let me go back just a minute. You just dumped a lot of stuff there. One was you don't take attendance. And so I want to go back to that for just a second, because I've gone kind of across the board on this. I used to, if you've read my first book, I said we don't want our leaders to have to do math. And so we don't require they take attendance. But this was, when I wrote that book, there weren't a lot of great, easy tools for taking attendance. It was more work. You had to actually log into a website or do it on a spreadsheet and all of that, where a lot of the tools now, a lot of the databases have it built into it. It'll automatically send an email to the leader, and all they have to do is check off a name, and that's it, basically. So it makes it super simple. So I've come around a little bit on that, because at Harvest we do attendance, and one thing, it just gives me a pulse on week to week, especially looking year over year, looking at the dips. One thing it has shown me is that I saw over the last year, when we had major dips in attendance, it was because we were distracting them with events. I could point out, okay, we had this event that week, and so we had half the number of people go to small groups, all throughout the year. And so it was a little bit of just a light bulb of, wow, if we offer other things, people are going to, not go to group. And then here's something interesting too, Steve. After every one of those dips, our average attendance went down. So it didn't recover to where it was before the dip. So, we had this many and we had about the same. And then all of a sudden we'd have an event and it dipped down to about, a half or a third. And then it would come up to about 75% or 80% of where it was before the dip, before the event, and it would stay there. And so all of this data has kind of given me some knowledge, and for planning for the future, if we're going to, how many groups do we need? So that doesn't play into, or do you get enough surveys and all that you can tell that way?
Sure. No, I think you bring up a great point, and I definitely wouldn't poo-poo so much taking attendance. I think a lot of it forms out of our own
What's
culture.
your language, Steve?
Yeah, I know.
This is Lifeway.
I was trying to say pujos.
Okay.
But I wouldn't poo-poo attendance, but a lot of times that's where groups will leave it at. Part of the honesty is that we're a proprietary software. We create our own stuff. And so for them to create that is just something I don't want to, I have other tools at my means to get me what I need. Something else, though, just to kind of keep helping to tweak people's minds and get them to think in a different way. When you read Acts 2:42 through 47, which we always, talk about so much, about that's what group life is all about. We want to do everything that's in that chunk of scriptures because it's modeled to us. What is interesting is that frequency is never talked about in those passages. Temple courts it is throughout the scripture, but frequency is not talked about on the house to house side. So the question is, what we're more after, and maybe I should learn to state it clearer, is who as a leader are you caring for? And again, our groups are launched for life. So the deck's not getting reshuffled or anything like that is happening. But there are 5 couples in my group, and whether all of them come or not isn't as much as are we giving the right care for them. And so it's just important that you're right. There are a lot of tools. We know lots of great guys that are running software companies that build groups software that you're right. Attendance is much easier to take, but I also wouldn't want it to discount, is the care really happening in there? So I think it's just a blend of both. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's one of those blends that sometimes attendance, we tend to count noses and nickels all through church. And as long as you're getting lots of both, then life is good. And sometimes it's a false positive.
Absolutely. The other,
but it's a good, like you said, I love what you said on the attendance piece too.
No, the other side of it, I attended a groups conference several years ago, and I was in a breakout, and somebody asked the person who was doing the breakout, well, how do you know if people are being discipled in your groups? That's always the question, which we're going to get into, I think, with soft data. But the answer was, we figure if they're showing up to group, they're being discipled. Maybe not, probably not. So let's get into that a little bit, Steve. I think you have captured something with the idea of not only getting hard data, but even more important, getting soft data. So talk about what that means.
Yeah. So there's 2 things. One would be a story that I tell usually at conferences. And when Lisa and I first came on at Saddleback, a very well-meaning couple invited us over for dinner, and a little bit older than us. We were excited to meet them. Obviously, we didn't know very many people, and so when we drove up to their house, this was long before you had GPS systems and all that. I'm almost scared to think that I think we may have even had a Thomas guide with us to get to their house. That's how long ago this was.
I don't even know what that is, a Thomas guide.
Yeah, just Google it, or put in your search engine, and
I'm familiar with, but yeah,
it was the forerunner before MapQuest. This is how bad this is getting. But anyway, so as we were going to their house, figuring out where they were located, you're like, oh my goodness, this is in a great neighborhood. I think I'm really going to love these people. And you're pulling up in their driveway, and you're getting buzzed in, and you're like going, oh my. These could be new great friends for us. We would love these friends. And so you're having dinner with them, talking about them, and they have a beautiful view of the ocean. And so we're just like going, we're going to be lifelong friends. And so we're in this whole conversation and having a fun time at dinner. And at dessert, they had brought out some catalogs, and it wasn't that was such a bad move, but it was such it was like, it just tilted our heads a little bit, like on, oh, what's happening now? And they were just saying, hey, we know that, sometimes being in ministry can be hard, and we want to help, this is a great way to supplement your income. And we found it to be great and all that. And appreciated the pitch, appreciated everything they had to say. But Lisa and I left the dinner feeling a little bit hollow because, we came with one expectation and we left like, I think this may be our last time we see him if we say no. And it was. And, but the point is that a lot of times we do the same thing with our group leaders. We come along them saying, hey, we want to be your best friends, but yet we're always going after the hard data we talked about. We're always talking about, hey, did you jump through the hoops? Did you do everything we asked you to do? Did you fill out the forms? Did you do the latest curriculum? Did you push the health assessment? Did you push the group assessment? And they're coming in saying, hey, this is a relationship. And at Saddleback, we're always saying, hey, we're a family. We're a family together. But yet we found out that a lot of our engagements with our leaders didn't feel like family. They felt like, I need something from you. And hard data is stuff that you want. But the thing that we stumbled upon is that soft data is what they're wanting to talk about. And when you look at the life of Jesus, when Jesus walked this planet, and you can kind of look through this, is that he generally, not every time, but almost all the time, when he met somebody, he took care of their needs, and then he met their physical needs, but then he talked about the living water and the bread of life and ministered to them, and then walked them through the gospel. And a lot of times we don't get that page out of his playbook, and we always want to say, hey, I want my stuff first, and I want you to do what the church wants. And what can happen is you miss the relational side. And so part of soft data is simply just making sure that you get to know the person first, that you get to know what they're about and who they are as a leader. And again, when you think through a family system, we know that the more time you spend with your kids when they're younger, if you have kids, or if you don't have kids, you can remember when your parents, parented you. But the more time you spend with them, the more likely you are to have a better relationship where when the hard conversations come, they're more apt not to leave the room than to, they're more apt to stay with you and have a conversation than leave the room. Mm-hmm. And I can think of that as our kids are in their 20s now. We have had much more robust conversations because we didn't violate them by saying, hey, I'm not going to spend any time with you. Kids are better not seen. I grew up in that generation where kids were best not to be heard from or engaged with. Right. They were just, hey, get through school, go to college, get a job, and get out of the house. Yeah. And so mom and dad can have fun. So the soft data is simply just engaging with your group leaders, discovering who they are. In the period of a calendar year, what's important to them? Like I've known Chris. I know that if I'm in St. Louis and I buy him a St. Louis hat, which I'll never waste money on something like that. But if I did that and I brought it to him at a conference, he'd go, jersey. Oh my gosh.
Pujols jersey.
Yeah. I may bring you mine now that I have. I actually have a St. Louis one from him, so I may have to give that to you. But the point is that, there's an equation we have is that when you want to speak truth to somebody, to your group leaders, and the truth is your hard data. When you want to speak truth to somebody, it is built on a platform of trust. That means if I'm going to speak the truth, do I trust the person enough who's giving me the information? And then you can only be a trusted resource if you've spent the time with them. So you have truth that's built on trust, and trust is built on a platform of did you spend time with them? And so when we're talking about discipleship, I have parents that will say, hey, I told my kid what to do and they didn't do it. And, we have that too. But the ability to follow up with them and ask the harder questions of why requires that you've spent time with them so that they can trust you, so that when you speak the truth, hopefully they change their behavior. And if you go to any sporting event, like a St. Louis Cardinals game over in Busch Stadium, if that's what it's still called in St. Louis, You go out there, there's going to be some person on a microphone screaming into the microphone, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell, which is going to be a true statement. But the problem is that that source that's speaking the truth isn't trusted. So people walk by and they're paying no attention to them. And in the same way, when you want discipleship to happen into your small groups, it has got to be built on a foundation that you've spent time with them. When you look at Peter, when you look at Paul, when you look at Jesus, the number one part of discipleship is the relational part of it. Is it relational discipleship, or is it you're checking boxes? And so it's going to be super important that you know all the critical information for them. And I'll never forget when I stumbled upon this. I was talking to a group leader, happened to be a lady at the time when I was first on at Saddleback. I was it. We didn't have any infrastructure or anything like that. And I came meeting with her and I said, hey, talk to me about your life. What's important to you? And I'll give you some formula to help you with this, to engage this part of it out. But she was talking about certain dates and she goes, November 15th. And I'll never forget, it's the day after my wife's birthday. But she goes, November 15th is important. I go, hey, why is that important? I thought it was a birthday or an anniversary. And she goes, that's when my sister committed suicide. And in an teary moment, it was a point where I could connect with her. And back then, texting wasn't around or stuff like that. So it's much easier to communicate with people. But I sent a card to her every year as, she was one of our group leaders. And I just said, I know this week is hard, as I can't even imagine what you're going through, but just know that I'm praying for you. And it didn't matter that I was a pastor. What mattered is that I cared about the things that she cared about. And it's the same thing in evangelism. Only your friends come to know Jesus. And so if you're not building friendships with the people that you want to see walk across the line of faith, you're going to miss. And in the same way, soft data is those simple things that where you get to know them. I talked to our community leaders, got a community leader retreat coming up at the end of the month right now. Community leaders are the people that help us to navigate, working with our group leaders. And I always tell them, if you can't tell me the spouse's name, if you can't tell me their kids' names, if you don't know their anniversary, if you don't know their birth dates, those are just prime, simple things to engage with a group leader on that can get to know them. But if I could I be a pure Saddleback geek and give an acrostic?
Absolutely. You have to. You have to do that before you leave.
So if you're, it's burned into you. You're gonna do. If you don't know how to do an acrostic, boy, you're just a loser at Saddleback Church. But think of the word speak, and because you may be sitting out there and you're like going, I know how to get the soft data. The hard data. That's hardwired into most of us as group pastors to go after that piece. But sometimes the soft data doesn't come as easy for us. So let me just give you just a quick little acrostic that can help you out. And it's just off the letter speak. And in speak, all it is the S is just saying, hey, what's your story? Tell me your story. Now, the beautiful thing about this is they will pick up wherever they want to. Now, if you're talking to an older person, they say, well, I was born in, Omaha, Nebraska. You better buckle up because it's going to be a long conversation. Yeah. But, as a leader, they'll start where they are comfortable with. And the great thing is the more conversations you have with them, the more you're going to learn about their story. I've seen that in our small group, like when we've done communion before. And, we say, how did you find Christ? Well, 20 years ago, when we first met each other, it was pretty a generic version. But now we're at the place where I find out, you were a drug dealer for how long? And you left the cartel when? And, you killed people? No, none of that happened. But you find out more about the person's story. So the S stands for just, what's your story? Just give it to me. And that's a great place to start off. Mm-hmm. The P is, as they're telling the story, you want to learn what they're passionate about, because generally people will start to give glimpses into what they like or what they're passionate about. I've got a neighbor that is passionate about plants. I got another neighbor that's passionate about tools. I got another neighbor that's passionate about dogs, and so you pick up different things from, where they go with. And so you want to be listening to the passion areas with your group leaders because you want to speak back into that. There's a lot of them that are very tied around different sports teams, and they're excited about that. But it builds a rapport that can start to give you windows to be able to get the hard data that you're wanting. The E is just encouragement. How are you giving them encouragement? And hopefully every time you meet a group leader, you're giving them encouragement. You always want to be able to give them a look, a word, a touch to be able to bring excitement into their lives. And, and when you're giving encouragement, we always say, listen with your eyes. So make sure you're looking at them if you're giving encouragement. Good Lord, there's nothing worse than getting distracted by your phone in the midst of a heartfelt conversation.
And just be careful with that touch part too. You want to,
well, that's true. I knew this would, this is with Lifeway, and I knew that would jump into that part really, really quick. But, look, a word of encouragement and then a touch. I will say it's fascinating, especially during this pandemic, that, there's studies done on infants that without certain touch that have a failure to thrive. And in the same way, adults, and you're right, you need boundaries,
I think that goes without saying, although there's been some very public, we'll skip over that, but there's been some public figures that have gone down for not so good touching.
And there's a lot of studies in people who take things and going down a slippery pathway that Chris was just alluding to, and we were not going to go into the names or anything like that. No. But it's fascinating. It does usually start with a touch. And this is why it's super important. It's not so much for you going after them, although that could be a problem, but it's also you're maybe communicating the wrong messages. And I'm not trying to get too prudish on anybody here, but if you're going with the opposite gender, just be careful.
I saw a beautiful picture of this actually the other night. The Oscars. I don't know if you watched the Oscars, but there was everybody knows about
a slap.
The slap.
Was that the touch you're talking about?
No, and I won't get into, was it Chris Rock's fault or Will Smith's? Violence is never the thing. Anyways, but they showed some video or pictures between after that happened during the commercial break, and it was Tyler Perry and Denzel Washington had Will Smith on the stage, and Tyler Perry had his hands on his shoulders, and Denzel had his hand on his arm, and it was just this posture and picture of, hey man, it's going to be okay, and they were speaking truth into his life, and obviously I think they have the trust and all of that went along with it, but it was just a picture of them just putting their hands on him saying, hey, we're here for you.
Yeah. And just the rule of thumb and encouragement is you just want to think through a look, a word, a touch. And obviously, sometimes encouragement is needed in a tough time and in hard situations. And the bottom line is the greater the pain, the less words you need, the more presence you need. And so if you're talking to one of your group leaders and they need encouragement in a real hard time, your presence is more valuable. Your look is more valuable than the words you could speak with that. So probably enough on that. We're digressing very quickly on that. Although I would want to dip deeper into the Oscars.
Yeah. So we got story, passion, encouragement. What's the A?
The A is abilities. And part of what you're trying to look for here is what natural abilities do they have? Your group leaders have incredible abilities. And obviously what you're looking for is selfishly, do they have abilities that can help our group ministry go to that next level? But if you put on your whole church hat and they're modeling the same thing in their group, they're helping find what are the abilities that are sitting in my group that could help our church in a great way. And I have way too many stories on this where we have done this wrong, where a group leader just was sitting on gold in their group. I mean, people who had talents that could help our church in incredible ways. And we stumbled on it, not through the group leader, unfortunately, but there are a lot of great stories where we do find it through the group leader when, Rick needs something and all that. So you're looking for the abilities they have. And then the K is just knowledge. What are they reading? What are they listening to? What's their podcast? What do they have wisdom on? and stuff like that. So the whole speak across it can be used for your group leaders. It's also a great evangelism tool to speak people to, starting from ground zero and just having a way to start to get to know somebody.
Yeah. Greg Laurie, our pastor, I mean, he's always been an evangelist. Evangelism is his thing with the Crusades, but he always talks about how the hardest part, and even for him, is where do you start? How do you start that conversation? And it's so funny. I was out riding motorcycles with him one time, and we were just stopped for a break, and we were beside this real pretty kind of lake where a guy was fishing, and I watched him live this out. He, the guy came up and he started talking to him. He asked him about his story, why he liked to fish. Got in by the end of the conversation, he had invited him to church and had shared a little bit of the gospel with them. But it started with what you just talked about. So I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think most people who are running a small group ministry, a lot of times you get paralyzed because you may be listening to this and go, oh man, I don't know much about my group leaders. And just like you said, Chris, this is a great place to start. Just start to get to know the story. You don't have to go within a formal apology. Maybe if they've been your group leader for 20 years and you don't know anything about them, you might start with that and go, hey, you know what? I'm not a great pastor in this moment, and I want to make up for that and take it to this next level.
That's good. And if you missed it, I love the picture of truth is built on a platform of trust. And I don't know if you mentioned it this time, but in the conference you talk about trust is built on a platform of time. And so the more time you spend with somebody, the more trust, obviously, that they have in you. And then you can speak some truth in the hard data. And I see that short-circuited all the time. We start with the truth before we've given the time and gotten the trust. And that's probably a lot of what's wrong with our society at this point, because we love spitting the truth, don't we?
Yeah, it's funny just how you've already formulated your opinion and you've already got your data points and your stump speech already ready to blast somebody out, and you don't take the time to find out why they're doing, why they look the way they look, why they act the way they look.
Yep.
And and that's why Chris Rock messed up.
Back to the Oscars. Yes. Brian and I did an Oscars episode a couple of years ago and did really well. We missed the boat by not doing this year because that would have been a fun one to talk about, but at least Steve and I got into it. So that's the two sides of what we're talking about. You got your hard data, which I think everybody should have. And one thing we talk about is be honest with your hard data. Once you know where you are with your numbers, with your leadership, make sure you're honest with where you are. And then the most important thing is that soft data. So getting to know somebody, spending time with them, knowing what's important to them through a calendar year. I love Steve walks through an exercise during our conference, Align conference, where you just ask somebody, what are the important dates this year? And the anniversary, birthday, kids stuff and all that. That's the stuff, soft data that we really should care about.
Yeah, I know. I say this. I don't know if I said it at Align, but really, a classic example of this is when we were taking our daughter to college, which the same city that Chris lives in, which is Nashville, which she now lives in, and I hate his city for stealing my daughter. But the classic line is that 6 years ago, rewind the tape, or 7, can't remember right now, but Rick was just engaging with me through email, and I think it could have been texting. I'm not sure the methodology, but he just said, hey, I know that tomorrow is going to be a hard day for you because you are going to go on a plane as a family of 4 and you're going to come back as a family of 3 because you're dropping your daughter off. And he goes, that's a hard time. And I just want to let you know that Kay and I are praying for you. Now, the great thing is he's listening to me enough that he knows the situation of what's happening. He sees that I'm going to be gone, and he understands why, but he vocalizes it to me through text or email, or however it happened. But the point is the byproduct is it endeared me to him that much more. My joke is it always endeared me more to him that day than his last 6 sermons, which I can't tell him that because he'd be depressed. But it's the same thing for your group leaders. When you text them to say, hey, just want to say I'm praying for you on your birthday. Hey, I know it's your kid's birthday today. Could you give him this verse from me and just let him know I'm praying for him? That will build the endearment so that maybe when the group leader isn't doing what you want and you have coffee with them and you say, hey, we're all about changing lives, changing destinies of people. And you kind of got to lean into the truth a little bit. You've got the time with them, so they actually trust you and they'll play ball with you. So yeah, no pun intended there.
Back circled it back. We're back to baseball. So that's good. Way to wrap it up there, Steve. And that is going to wrap it up for this episode. Thanks, Steve, for hanging out with me. I think it was better without Brian. Don't you feel that way?
Brian who?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, we kid. Brian will be back on the next one, and we love.
Hi, Brian. I love you. I really do.
We love him, so we miss him. But thanks for hanging out, and we would love if you would rate us. If you'd like to do that on iTunes or anywhere else that you're allowed to rate this podcast, and subscribe. That's the easiest way to get it every week. All the podcasts I listen to, I have subscriptions. So I have Group Talk, which is a podcast that Steve is involved with. I have that in my subscriptions. And so it just pops up every week when there's a new one. And so that's a great way to do it. So go to Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and subscribe to Group Answers. And we will see you next week.